We are getting close to the end of the year. Holy bananas. It has flown by and just hurtled. So today we're going to talk about everything I read for the month of November. And we're going to talk about first all the cryptid books I read because that was most of my month. And then I read a chunk of others that were not cryptid related. But since the cryptid readathon happened for the month of November, let's get into all the weird books that I read first. So the first one I read was The Fright Before Christmas by Jeff Ballinger. And this book is a historical look at all the weird legends of yore, of stuff that has to do with Krampus and the Belsnickel and Grilla and her weird Yule lad sons and the Yule cat who, if you don't have new clothes for the holidays, well, it's gonna eat you, and too bad. Be sure you get new clothes or sew some up, or I don't know. I don't know what to do. You're gonna be eaten by a big giant cat. It gets into the history and lore and all of this stuff about all these strange stories that were told over the years to their children and passed on to all these different generations. And it's a wild book. I absolutely loved it. I have a standalone review for that, and I will link that down below. Also, any of the books I talk about today, if you're interested in those, I'll have links all down below for those. Those are affiliate links, which is a great way to support the channel and to support indie bookstores. So, the next book I read after that was The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood. And this is a really short novella. It's written in 1910, so it's an older book, and it's a story about the Wendigo, which is a creature that lives in the colder climates, a lot of times like out in the woods, in the mountains. It used to be a human, but at some point it consumed the flesh of humans and became the Wendigo. Somehow that turns into like a crazy creature with antlers and really weird long feet and whatnot, and yeah. So the story follows a group of guys who are going on a moose hunting trip. At some point, they're not finding any moose. They decide they're going to split up. So two guys go across the lake. One is this like young seminary student, or he's going to be a priest or something like that. And he goes with his guide. And his guide, he's kind of worried about going over there because he has heard of and knows of a possible strange creature, the Wendigo, that might inhabit that area. And he's worried about it. And they go over there. And well, the guide who's worried about it disappears. And the seminary guy, when he disappears, he starts hearing like the guy's voice that disappeared, and he's yelling about his fiery feet, and this voice is echoing through the forest and the woods, and it sounds like it's coming from everywhere, and it's all crazy. So he goes back to the rest of the hunting party, goes across the lake and finds them and tells them what happened. They don't really believe it, but they come back and then they see things that make them believe. And it's a crazy story. The flow of words is really great. I enjoyed it. It was just a weird little novella from back in the day, and it was quite interesting. So the next thing I read was Confirmed Sightings, and that is 3 stories. It is a cryptid triple creature feature, and the 3 stories are by P.L. Macmillan, Bridget D. Brave, and Ryan Marie Ketterer. The first story is a strange and dark romance between a human and a cryptid. The next story is kind of a sci-fi horror that involves one of my favorite cryptids, Mothman. And the third story is it's a mystery horror. It's not a private eye, but it's a police foot or Bigfoot in this town of cryptids who has to solve a murder mystery. And you have all these cryptids that are involved in the story. And that was pretty cool. And I've talked about this book in depth in a couple of other videos. I will have a link to the standalone review for this if you want some more info on that book down below. But it was awesome. I highly recommend it. If you like cryptids, if you like horror, if you just like weird stories in general, Confirmed Sightings is a lot of fun. So the next thing I read was Where the Footprints End, Volume 2, and that is by Timothy Renner and Joshua Cutchin, and that was a Bigfoot nonfiction. And it talks about like all the strange stuff surrounding the Bigfoot phenomena. I had read the first volume in this series a while back, and that one was also awesome. And this one gets a little more in depth and talks about just some of the strange occurrences that happen when sightings have happened, like how people will see UFOs in the area or strange lights and orbs, and talking about how seeing like eye glow, not eye shine, which is where the eyes reflect light, but like the eyes glow as and by themselves. And other stuff with like stick signs, trackways, the different footprints, how like some of them will have only 3 toes instead of, 5, some will have 4, and the different meanings behind that, and just, hoaxers and going into that a little bit as well. It was just really interesting and fascinating overall to read it. And the flow of writing is really great. You get some of the first hand accounts of people who have had experiences. And then you also get a plethora of knowledge from Timothy Renner and Joshua Cutchin on just stuff that is aligned with what each different chapter talks about. And it is weird and wondrous, and I really liked it. After that, I read The Lock by Steve Alton. And this is a Nessie book. And I would say it's horror, but it's not like too crazy intense horror. It follows the story of this guy, Zach Wallace, when he was younger, had fallen into the lock and almost drowned. Growing up, he had a real bad relationship with his father. And when he was 9, his mom finally had enough of his crap after something kind of traumatic happened. And then he up and left, moved to America, never seen his dad since. So now he's a marine biologist, had a lifelong fascination with aquatic creatures and such. And so he's going down 3,300 feet in the Sargasso Sea. And he has this lure that he's created to try and draw out a giant squid to capture on film for the first time, to actually see one alive in its natural habitat. So he goes down there with a couple of crew. Well, one appears, but then the squid gets all freaked out and grabs onto their ship because these other creatures appear. I don't want to say they're Nessies, but maybe. But then stuff gets all effed up and they all almost die, and then one of the guys dies and they barely make it out alive, and then Zach basically drowns again and ends up in the hospital. When he wakes up, his fiance dumps him. He's getting sued by the family of one of the guys that died because the professor that he worked with threw him under the bus and made it out to be that it was all his fault. And just basically he loses his face and his career. And so he becomes a raging alcoholic after this. And one day he's in his hotel room with a prostitute. Someone comes knocking on his door and is like, hey, your dad has been accused of murder. He's going to trial and he might get the death penalty, and he needs you to come and support him. And they had a terrible relationship, so he doesn't want to at all. But turns out the guy that told him this is actually his half brother, and tells him about how he reconciled with his father and da-da-da-da-da. So he decides to come there and deal with it. And then it gets all crazy, and there's all this stuff about the Loch Ness Monster that comes out because his dad is like, well, the guy that he got into a fight with fell into the loch, and it was the Loch Ness Monster that got him. So stuff gets all crazy. And then you get into the history of Scotland and some of the families with the Bruces and the Wallaces, and just the possibility of what Nessie could be. And it's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with that book. It's great. I want to get into more of Steve Alton's books. I want to check out the Meg series, and this one has more books in the series, so I might get those as well in the future. It's a big chunk of a book too. It's like 500 pages, but if you like Nessie, you might like this book. So after that one, I read To the Devil, a Cryptid by Hunter Shea, and it is about the Goat Man. And on a dark and stormy night, a cult of Satanists go out to the forest and decide that they're gonna summon the Goat Man. Well, they summon something, and the crap hits the fan. The Goat Man comes forth, and it is a slasher, and it's crazy. And the Goat Man is not happy. And then, it's up to some people to figure out how are they gonna stop this thing from murdering everyone, because he's on a rampage. And it seems like nothing's going to stop him. After that one, I read the book The Reyes Incident by Brianna Morgan. And this is another fun one. It's a splasher. It's about killer mermaids. And it's a story about this woman, Liv Reyes. And she goes to the police station and has this insane story to tell about how all of her friends were murdered by killer mermaids. They went into the woods in this old abandoned bunker that a lot of it was underwater. It was abandoned in the 1950s and no one really knew why. And she tells a story about how they encounter these 3 mermaids. And apparently the mermaids are hungry and not a lot of food down there. And they can't really leave the bunker because where the heck are they going to go? And where else is food going to come from? But humans, right? It was fun. It was a addictive read. I flew through it. I definitely had a good time with that one. So those were all the cryptid books that I read. So now we're going to get into the other ones that were mainly horror and one that was like a feel-good book. Fever House by Keith Rawson. This book is insanity. I don't even know. I just don't think I knew what I was signing up for when I got it, but it was great. And there's a second one coming because there better have been after how it ended, because I was like, God, this is a very open ending and it left so much stuff to be desired. And then I found out there's another book. So I was like, oh, thank goodness. So it's about multiple things. So there's this guy, Peach Serrano. He's kind of like a mafia gangster type guy, but it never really specifically says he's mafia. He's just a collector of things. He's got a lot of money. He'll loan you some money. But if you don't pay him back, he's probably going to break your freaking legs. So he sends his two guys, his muscle, to this one guy's house. And the two guys, they've known each other since they were like teenagers. I think they went to juvenile detention together, so something along those lines. Anyways, they both kind of have a bad feeling about going to this one apartment to talk to this guy about the money that he owes Peach. And they go there, and this guy's like a meth head. And there's some girl there too, and she's all real thin and just doesn't look so good. He refuses to give them money, and so they're gonna take him to the warehouse to have him roughed up a bit. And the guy's like, I can't leave without what is in the freezer. And they're like, what? So they go in the freezer, and they find this withered hand. And when they're near it, they hear like whispering, and it like just almost feels like a rage, like they just want to do really terrible things and get all murdery. I don't know, that's kind of the vibe this hand gives off and makes you want to do. So there's that. There's also this family involved, and the son of the family works for Peach Serrano. And then his mom, she was in a band. His dad was also in that band. His dad had ended up killing himself a while back, and they wrote this song that somehow there was a weird use for it. So there's this Black Ops government agency too, right? So I'm trying to tie this all together. It's just a wild story. And so this government agency has in their possession someone they call Saint Michael, who may or may not be an archangel. And Saint Michael has these weird psychic visions that lead them to different artifacts and things. And they're trying to track down this hand because they used to have it, but it gets a hold of you and gets inside your head. And so one of the people who was around it took it and left it at a dive bar, which is how I guess the meth head ended up with it. So that's one of what they call the remnants. When this thing gets out in the world, effed up stuff starts happening, creating what one might call a fever house. I'm not going to go too in depth about what the fever house is. If you're interested, I also have a standalone review for this, and I will link it down below. Any of the books that I talk about, if I have a standalone review, it'll be down there in the darkness. That book is wild. I loved it. I can't wait for the next one. It is just, I don't know, it's absolute insanity. So after that, I read Holly by Stephen King. And this was great. I don't know if it's like, I want to call it classic King, because it had kind of that vibe, you know? And it's a story, it's a mystery, but I mean, you know the whole time what's going on, but the characters don't. It's probably the first book I've ever read where the killers were like in their golden years. They were old. The reason they were doing the killings that they deluded themselves into thinking was really weird. So the story's Holly. It's about Holly Gibney, which is a beloved character that has been in the Stephen King universe for quite some time. I had never read any of the other books that she was in, but I really enjoyed this with her and the whole mystery of it all. Like, these people, they start disappearing, and at first they just think it's one person, but they find that all these other people have gone missing over the years, kind of in the same area, and like they're such different victims that no one ever connected it, because it would be like a child or a Mexican man or a white woman. Like, there was no connection. There was no similarity. Like how serial killers were normally like have a type. There was no type for this. So they were weird and overlooked and never connected together. And it's how Holly figures it out and how it all goes down. And it was great. I had a lot of fun with that. So after that, we read Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree, the follow-up to Legends and Lattes. I loved it. It was cozy and rosy and nosy. And oh, so lovely. There's a little bit of action in it. It follows Viv, before, when she was still gearing to go in battle head first. And that's just what she's doing in the beginning of this book. Only she's super green around the gills because she's a noob in the battlefield world. And she's fighting through all these wights and skeletons. They're going after this necromancer. And she's leaving all her people behind. You should always be with the people who got your back. But she's all alone and she's like, oh, why are these people taking forever, whatever. And then, you know what? Arrogance, youth. She gets stabbed in the leg and she gets stabbed bad. And so when the Rackham's Ravens finally catch up to her, the head guy is like, fights off some people around her. And he's like, hey, try not to die, okay? And then they go and they fight through the rest of the people. So her leg is way too bad. She can't stand on it. They're going to have to drop her off in this town, and she's going to have to get some R&R and recover for a few weeks. Viv does not like this, but she's going to have to deal with it. And so while she's in this town, the town of Merk, she makes a lot of lovely friends along the way. And there's a romance interest, and there's a bookshop that she helps to bring it back to life. And there's a bakery down the way that has luscious desserts and pastries and smells, and it's so cozy and rosy and nosy, and I loved it. I liked it just as much as Legends and Lattes. I would highly recommend it. It is awesome. So after that, we read Heavy Oceans by Tyler Jones. And this would totally be an X-Files episode. It's so freaking weird. It's about these two brothers, Eric and Jamie. Eric is older by 2 years. Jamie's the younger one. When they were kids, Eric would sleepwalk all the time. And Jamie's mom was always like, hey, watch Eric and make sure he doesn't hurt himself when he's sleepwalking around. And he called it Sleep Eric. And Sleep Eric would do stuff he would never do during the day. He would get up at night and cook like a 5-course meal. And he would draw pictures, or he would go climb up a tree and stare into the sky and just do weird stuff. Their dad was not the best of humans at all. He would beat their mother. He would knock Eric around, sometimes Jamie. More so Eric. Eric got the brunt of it because he was older. And one time he shot out the street light that was in front of their house because the light was shining in the bedroom or something, and he didn't like it. And so he was kind of a rat bag. And eventually the father left, which was better for all of them concerned, let's be honest. One of Eric's sleep episodes, he goes outside, Jamie follows him, and Eric goes and he stands under that street light that had been shot out. But the street light is on again, and Jamie's watching him. Eric's looking up into the sky. And then all of a sudden, Eric's not there. Where did Eric go? I'm not saying it was aliens, but and then it gets weird. And you fast forward to when they're older. Eric now lives in Hawaii, and he works on a fishing boat with his friend Maddie and Maddie's dad, Ed. They go out for, I don't know if it's months at a time, maybe months at a time, and they catch fish and bring them back, and that's how they make their living, and they're talking about getting another boat for the business and all of that. Well, Jamie comes to visit because him and his wife might be separating, they're not doing so well, and he just needs to get away and, see his brother. He hasn't seen his brother in a long time and all that stuff. And so he goes there, bad stuff happens, so they go out on Ed's fishing boat, which is who his brother works for, one night, and they go out pretty far. One of them is at the front of the boat, and he's looking out there, and he's like, hey guys, you should probably come see this. They come up there, and ahead it what looks like this big circle going straight down into the ocean. Like, there's nothing in there. It's just a circle of nothing. Who knows? So Ed goes back to the driver's wheel to get them the heck out of there, and let's go. So he kicks it, but they're just being pulled back towards that big hole in the ocean. All of a sudden, there's a big jet that comes over. Looks like a weird secret military kind of deal, and it goes over the hole, and all of a sudden just gets sucked in the hole, and it breaks apart, and pieces of it go everywhere. And they're like, "Holy effing crap!" So they're trying to get out, but then the boat just gets sucked in there. They all think they're gonna die. But then all of a sudden it stops falling, and they're there. They all kind of go and everybody is still alive somewhat for the most part. And they look up, and above them is the ocean. Over the side and down below is the sky and all the stars. And it gets so weird and it's so good. I really like how Tyler Jones writes. It was absolutely fantastic. It was weird. I like the characters. I like the story. It was so strange. I would highly recommend it if you like the X-Files, if you like weird stuff, if you like horror in general. It's great. Then after that, I read The Door-to-Door Bookstore by Karsten Henn. And this is just a really feel-good book. It's about this older, I call him the book walker. He works for this bookstore and his friend had owned it for many years. And his friend has now been put into a home because he's getting old and up there in his years and can't take care of himself. So he's in an old folks home and his daughter has taken over the store. And it seems like, you know, she doesn't really want him there, but he still has the customers and he's going to deliver these books. And honestly, when he delivers these books, he knows these customers so well. It's like they light up and are so happy to see him. As he does his book walking and delivering books, one day this little 9-year-old girl named Sasha joins him and she's a little firecracker and just kind of shakes things up, and she wants to help with him delivering the books. You know, she wants to hand the books to the people, and then sometimes she'll dart into the house and, you know, he's like, sorry, she came in there. But then the people invite him in and they have tea and they talk about things that they maybe never would have. And it seems to bring these people joy. And the little girl kind of brings him out of himself. But then he ends up losing his job. And some really sad things happen. And some of the characters in this book that he delivers books to are in bad situations and in sad situations, and it's kind of how like books kind of save them, and it's heartfelt and emotional, and the ending is just so uplifting and sweet. And I think this is translated fiction too. I think it was originally written in German, and random book I picked up at the library. Just I like to read books about books sometimes. I have another one that I'm currently reading that's another book about books. I'm only a few pages into that one. So if you're a fan of when I talk about multiple books that I have read, the next video coming up will be about that, so stick around, check it out. And if you had fun hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.